Of you. Well, here's the question for us today. Is this president taking on too much, and will a bipartisan health reform bill pass at all? We're joined by Republican Congressman Ron Paul of Texas and Peter Morici, economist at the University of Maryland. Congressman Paul, I want to start with you. You made an interesting comment, and I want to read back to you your own quote. While the president's concern for the uninsured is no doubt sincere, his plan amounts to a magnanimous gift to the health insurance industry. What did you mean by that, Congressman?
Well, if the bill is passed the way they're talking about passing it, everybody would have to have insurance. So if there's about 10 million people who make $75,000 a year and they don't have insurance, and they did that on purpose for some reason. Now, if they're mandated, if they get punished if they don't buy insurance, they'll have to buy it, so the insurance industry gets more customers. You know, they want you into the system. And that's also the reason why if you have to go and pay for your own drugs, they're skyrocketing prices high. But if you have insurance, all of a sudden it costs you $5 instead of $105. So they're always pushing you into the system. And the system is made up of a combination of government and business working together. And it really, I think, hurts the consumer.
Peter Morici, you know, in your latest comments, you were talking about the reaction of the president says you can keep your own policy if you want, but you're talking about employers would be taxed 8% if they don't offer it. So therefore, it might be cheaper to go ahead and pay the tax and then cover the employees. Do you have any idea, or are there any estimates floating around that you subscribe to on how many employers would take that option, drop their health insurance coverage, and pay the 8% tax?
Well, I don't have an estimate. I mean, the Congressional Budget Office says very few. But in the reality is that if you think about it, there are all kinds of restaurants, dry cleaners, and so forth, where the average payroll is $60,000 a year or less. Paying 8% of $60,000 is just a lot cheaper than providing, say, a 60 or 70% subsidy on an $18,000 policy for a family of 4. So while this is the sort of thing that economists really can't estimate, just make a reasonable guess at, but we're really talking about tens of millions of people will lose their private health care coverage over the next couple of years if employers have a choice between paying an 8% tax and booting you into the government system or continuing what they're doing. And once some go, then the others have to go because they can't compete.
I want to ask Congressman Paul this question. Congressman, you know, we've seen a lot of back and forth, a lot of contention in D.C. Of course, Joe Wilson last week on the floor, kind of mocking the president. Is it that bad in D.C. right now, Congressman? You've been there for many, many years. I mean, have you ever? Is it as contentious as we're seeing on our television sets across this country?
I think so, and I think it's getting worse. And I think it represents the fact that the government is broke. And the more conservative individual who pays a lot of the bills, they're angry because they're paying the bills and can't get ahead. And the liberals who like to spend money, and even the recipients of these programs, they're getting scared because they can add up too. And there's a limit to how long you can run up these huge deficits, how much money you can just print out of thin air. So everybody's frightened, but it isn't for the same reason. It's one half against the other half, and yet we haven't changed policy. We're still doing all the things wrong. We're driving this country into total bankruptcy, and if and when we have a dollar crisis, this whole thing is going to quit working, and everybody's going to be very upset. And of course, then there could be political chaos outside of Washington. Of course, we already see this. There's the conflict here in the Congress, like you ask about, but we see it outside now. Just look at those town hall meetings and these demonstrations that are going on. A lot of people are sensing there are serious problems that we're facing, and nobody has an answer.
We're going to talk more about the dollar and the gold standard in the next segment, Congressman, with you.
Congressman, I wanted to ask you, the word that keeps popping up when people are talking about bipartisan support for some sort of bill, and the word is incremental. I wanted to ask you, are you opposed to any sort of health care reform at all, or is it the speed with which this administration apparently wants to implement that reform?
Well, you know, that is a misnomer about reform. You know, if you have a program that shouldn't exist and it involves 65% of the American people and somebody proposes it goes to 90%, then the compromise is going to 85% or 80%. That's not a compromise. A compromise might be if you shouldn't even have the program, you argue for zero. The other one arguing for increasing it, maybe you should split it by reducing it. But we always have the compromise that increases the amount of government involvement. There's no compromise compromise at all, and it's no reform whatsoever. It's making the problem worse. So I think that is deliberately done in order to deceive the people into thinking that, oh, if you're for compromise and reform, you're for good stuff. But you have to decide whether the government should be doing it at all, and I say the government shouldn't be doing most of these things, so it's hardly a compromise in my estimation.
Well, but Peter, Maurice, I want to bring you back in here, because if you look at the healthcare systems in Canada and the healthcare systems in Europe, I mean, costs are substantially lower for them. They're better. They have better bargaining power with pharmaceutical companies in general than we do here in this country. The argument can be made, of course, you don't get the same great health care. I believe we have good health care in this country, but they do have a better cost structure than we do right now.
They absolutely do have a better cost structure. Their systems are superior in some ways, ours are superior in others. But you have to remember, I spent many years studying the Canadian economy as a young man, and they have a superior civil service. I mean, look at the Veterans Administration and how poor a job it does of caring for our veterans. You know, the backups and claims and bureaucracy and problems that way. They don't have that in Canada and Britain. The fact of the matter is we have a second-rate civil service in the United States as compared to these countries, and they're simply not capable of running a program that effectively. That's why the post office is so bad.
All right, hold on.